webinar to provide a new paradigm as it sees food loss and waste through a circularity approach, which means there shouldn't be loss and waste throughout the food system, the whole food system. I'm sure we will learn more about these aspects today and how to best address them. I have seen the list of our panelists today, and I'm delighted to see the diverse representations from Indonesia, Waste for Change, China, Europe, regional think tank organization, and also from the meeting of a G20 Agriculture Chief Scientist, Max 20, which has launched an initiative on food loss and waste annually as part of G20. I think the role is so important. I'm excited to learn from all our panelists today about their insights and strategies for reducing food loss and waste. I would like to thank Neil O'Connor, presenting now the Stockholm Environment Institute, and CIPS, of course, for organizing this webinar. And I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, Azizah.
Thank you, Ibu Donna. Before we start the discussion, we would like to share again the Mentimeter page. Wait a second. Yes. So yeah, what pops into your mind when you hear about circular food systems? There are a couple here, maybe some keywords. There's food security, sustainable, sustainability, supportive, production, waste management. Thank you very much for participating. Before we start the discussion, allow me to highlight the background for our sessions today briefly. The narratives in our global food systems have focused on increasing production, which led to resource depletion and contributed to 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. It is also estimated that food and green waste form 44% of the global waste composition, which affects the food supply chain by reducing food producers' income, causing price volatility, and limiting access to food. Hence, there is an urgent need to decarbonize the food systems and make them more sustainable and efficient. G20 has the potential to encourage the effective process of continuous assessment, evaluation, and readjustment of public interventions to achieve food security by promoting circular food systems. Today, we will hear experiences from the panelists and explore the opportunity for the G20 countries to lead by example. We hope our event will encourage policymakers to acknowledge the multifunctionality of foods to design interventions and provide incentives that specifically target food loss and waste. Prevention with a circularity angle. I also want to encourage all participants to interact in the chat box. You can start by introducing yourself and your institution. Right, for this discussion, I would like to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Ms. Kuntum Melati, a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute, Asia. She brings 10 years of experience in development in Southeast Asia and internationally, having taken on various roles from research, facilitation, and program management. Her work focuses on natural resources management, food systems, and then circular economy, strong community participation, gender, and stakeholder engagement. She's one of the authors of the T20 policy brief on food waste minimization and circularity for optimizing urban food systems resilience, and the upcoming publication on the sustainable food value chain. Hi, Ms. Kuntum, good afternoon. Next, we have Ms. Anja Katalin de Cunto. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She's the project coordinator and policy advisor for the topics of food and procurement at Eurocities, the network of major European cities. Ms. Anja is currently leading the work on the big buyers for climate and environment, and she's managing the capacity building and replication activities in the Horizon 2020 projects Food Trails, focusing on cities' role for food system transformation in line with the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact and the Food 2030 initiative. She is also representing cities' interest in developing the EU proposal for a legislative framework for sustainable food systems, part of the Farm to Fork communication, which includes a more strategic use of public procurement for supporting food systems transformation and acknowledging the role of food environments. Hi, Ms. Anja, good afternoon. And then we have Dr. Felicitas Schneider, since 20, Hi, Dr. Schneider has focused on developing and implementing national food loss and waste prevention strategies, definitions, applied methodology for measurement and monitoring, and impact assessment of measures along the food supply chain. Since June 2017, she has been working at the German Federal Research Institute for Rural Areas, Forestry and Fisheries, the Thunen Institute of Market Analysis. She is the coordinator of the collaboration initiative of food losses and food waste launched at the meeting of Agricultural Chief Scientists, MAX G20, manages the global platform for food loss and waste experts and projects, and organizes annual regional food loss and waste workshops. Hi, Dr. Schneider. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi. And then we have Ying, Zhou. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Ms. Zhou Ying is an associate researcher of the China-ASEAN Environmental Protection Cooperation Center, or Foreign Environmental Cooperation Center. In recent years, she has mainly engaged in research on China-EU environmental cooperation, China-EU circular economy cooperation, marine debris control, China-ASEAN climate cooperation, and has been deeply involved in a number of regional environmental cooperation projects. Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Zhou.
Hi, this is Zhou. Nice to see you all.
Hi, thank you. And then last but not least, we have Ms. Azizah, a consulting manager at Waste for Change. She has been working on more than 20 consultancy and research projects. She is highly interested in developing data-driven policies for better waste management in Indonesia. Recently, she worked with Indonesia's Ministry of National Development Planning and World Resources Institute, supported by UK FCDO, in developing the first national baseline data on food loss and waste in Indonesia. Hi, Ms. Azizah, good afternoon. Welcome to, welcome to all of our panelists. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you here. We will start our discussion today with each panelist presentation, and then we will follow up by a Q&A session. So to all participants, I would like to encourage you to share any questions that you have in the question box, and we will try to answer all of your questions. Also, feel free to indicate who you are going to address your questions to. First, I would like to give the presentation to Ms. Kuntum Melati to share her presentation on circularity and food systems resilience, especially in the peri-urban connections.
Thank you, Azizah. Yes, so many thanks for the kind introduction. First of all, I would like to share an acknowledgement that CIPS has been working together with Royal Holloway University of London, International Water Management Institute, and Commission for Sustainable Agriculture Intensification, or COSI. So together we submitted a policy brief to the T20 Task Force 4. And my presentation, hopefully I'm just going to go briefly just to set the stage on our discussion today, which is on food waste minimization and circularity for optimizing urban food system resilience. So briefly, just so that we make sure we are on the same page, I would like to share what we mean by food loss and waste. And I think other panelists also have their own definition later on. So food loss and waste, according to UNEP and FAO, means the decrease in mass or nutritional value of food. This is usually happen throughout the value chain. So while food loss usually happens before the food reaches the final stage, it could be on the harvesting, processing, or producing. Food waste happen when the food already reaches the final stage, but it doesn't get consumed or left to spoil or expired, or also not fulfilling certain standard. While food loss usually exists in developing countries, food waste are more common in countries with higher GDP. And so why is food loss and waste a global phenomenon? It impacts food security and nutrition in many ways. First, they can cause a reduction of global and availability of food. Second, they can create economic losses, both from the income perspective and also investment perspective. And third, food waste is considered as one of the main causes of hunger, together with chronic poverty, disaster, and conflict. Next, please. So what are the challenges when we talk about food loss and waste? Food supply chains relies on a complex formal and informal channels. So how many of you that buy in the kiosk, buy in the supermarket or local market, and all of you are sensitive to interruption from extreme climate events, economic and political stresses, or pandemic as we have experiences. And it's important to have a more resilient supply chain on this. Also, by 2050, it is estimated that 80% of all food produce will be destined for urban areas. However, although half of food produce are for urban consumer, the urban consumer, they don't produce the food themselves, which places a significant pressure on rural and urban linkages. Urbanization led to an expansion of food supply system, and it could result in diet diversification, also disconnection from food sources that eventually led to an increase of food waste. So while many initiatives contribute to food loss, as Dr. Donna mentioned, and also Naila has mentioned, they often fall short in generating and applying circularity insight. Many initiatives also lack of practical implementation strategies, which make it hard to apply them in a specific context. Next, please. So aligned with the SDGs target, and yes, we have less than a decade, the SDG target 12, in particular 12.3, mentioned that by 2030, we need to have our global food waste at the retail and as well as consumer level, and reducing food losses along production and supply chain, including post-harvest losses. So in our policy brief, we propose 4 main action points, and I'm actually very delighted to have the other 4 panelists with us, even though we did not write the policy brief together, but all of these action points that I mentioned here is what they have been doing so far. And it will be really nice to hear from their own experiences. So first, we believe that waste absorption and resource recovery by urban and peri-urban farming is the key. And I will discuss more on the next slide on this. Second, on the competitiveness of recovered products with innovative business model or value chain supported by multi-sectoral policies. So Ms. Azizah and Ms. Ying will discuss more on this. And the third one on circular urban food system and how it requires the adoption of a broader city regional planning. This will be Ms. Anja and Eurocities will share her experience on this. And finally, the importance of strengthening partnership to minimize food waste, not working in silo. Dr. Felicitas will touch upon this. So next, please. So how can we promote circularity in food system? I think a lot of you has heard about circular economy because it has gained a lot of traction. And even though there's no general definition, in one of SER publication, we define circular economy as a regenerative system with circular material and energy flows, both in production and consumption system, which mimics nature and preserve resources through different circular strategies. And in this concept, circular economy aims to enhance the efficiency of resources utilization and recovery waste materials. So where bioeconomy, another concept, attempt to use renewable biomass from agriculture, forestry, marine, and other environment. So when we combine the concept of circularity and bioeconomy, we can bring benefit and more opportunities. It could be for food for animal feed, biogas from food waste, or either biodegradable products. On the second point, the recognition of positive role of urban and peri-urban farming. So the most common practices from this would be energy recovery from organic waste, followed by nutrition recovery via composting. So the idea is, again, minimizing the waste itself. On point 3, so if you see the waste hierarchy that we have in our slide here, disposal or landfilling should be the least preferable solution. Yet it's actually the most commonly employed, right? So circularity preferable products and products can include recovered food for human use or animal feed, again, soil management from composting and also biofuel. So in conclusion, considering that food waste happen across the value chain, only treating them at the end of the value chain could be problematic. And to avoid misaligned policies, we could apply system thinking by ensuring that intervention not only focus on waste management, but adoption of a more holistic planning perspective, which recognize the role of the urban and peri-urban farming, again, as a part of the whole food system. So with this webinar or discussion that we're going to have today, we do hope that the discussion will provide an opportunity for the G20 countries to lead by example and encourage policymakers to acknowledge the multifunctionality of food, to design intervention, and provide a conducive regulatory environment with incentives that especially target food loss and waste prevention. Next, so that's all from me. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to have a virtual discussion today. Thank you, Azizah. Back to you.
Thank you for the presentation. The policy call action will bridge nicely to our next speaker, Ms. Anissa from Waste for Change, who will discuss the challenges in food waste management and opportunities for resource recovery for farming. Ms. Anissa, the screen is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I will share my screen. Okay. Hope you can see my screen clearly. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will start. So today, I will share with you about food loss and waste management in Indonesia, in which I had an opportunity with Ministry of National Development Planning to identify the generation, the impacts, the causes and drivers, as well as the strategies to address the food loss and waste in Indonesia, as well as sharing to you about the food waste management that is currently conducted in Indonesia. So before we started, previously Mbak Kuntum already mentioned, I would like to set the context to make a difference between food loss and food waste. So I also use the FAO reference here. Food loss is happen in the first 3 stages of the supply chain, while food waste happens in the later 2 stages of the supply chain. And the result that I will show you after this is the one from the study with the Ministry of National Development Planning using this context. So the food loss and waste in Indonesia for the last 20 years, from 2000 to 2019, is around 115 to 184 kilogram per capita per year. And for of all of this food loss and waste, we found out that 44% comes from crops. So it's almost half of the food loss and waste. And in terms of the inefficiency, we found out that vegetables to be the one that is the most inefficient. In a way, from 100% of vegetable produced and ready to be consumed in Indonesia, 62.8% is wasted. And then for the impacts, we can see here that there are environmental impacts. In terms of greenhouse gas emission, the average contribution per year from the food loss and waste is equals to 7.29% of greenhouse gas emission in Indonesia. In terms of economic loss, we can see here that there is so much losses. It equals to 4 to 5% of Indonesia's GDP per year. And in terms of social, we measured the nutritional loss of the food loss and waste, the edible part especially. And we found out that 61 to 125 million people can actually be fed from this loss and waste. So it's almost 29 to 47% of Indonesia's population can actually benefit from the food loss and waste that occurred in Indonesia. And we also identified what are the causes and drivers that causes food loss and waste in Indonesia. And we found around 18 from the stakeholders consultation and meetings. We found around 18 causes and drivers, but from these 18, we list down the top 5 that is considered very important and might contribute much to the losses and waste. The first one is the lack of implementation of a good handling practice along the supply chain. The second one is insufficient quality of the storage space. The third one is market quality standards and consumers' preference. The fourth one is lack of information and education for food workers and also for the consumers. And the last one is the excess food portion and consumers' behavior. And from the identification of the generation and the impacts, as well as the causes and drivers, we with Bappenas, the Ministry of National Development Planning, created around 45 strategies, which can be summarized into 5 directions. The first one and maybe the most important one is the behavioral change, how we can focus more on development of training institution in the regions, also education for consumers. The second one is the strategy to improve food system support, especially for the upstream supply chains, for example, developing farmer corporation and making sure that the right infrastructure is placed on the place that needs it. And the third one is strengthening regulations and optimizing funding. Developing food loss and waste regulations and also allocating some funding for it. The fourth one is utilization of food loss and waste, how we ensure that if we already have excess food or if we already have the food loss and the food waste, to treat it responsibly. And the last one is development of study and data collection, because currently in Indonesia, there are very few of studies regarding food loss and waste, and it is very much needed to complete more information about food loss and waste condition in Indonesia. And the last one, this is the practice of food waste prevention and handling in Indonesia. As for food waste prevention, we already have several food banks operating in Indonesia, especially in Java Island, and one I found it in the Sumatra Island. Basically, they channel people with excess food with people who needs food, while also ensuring the quality of the food distributed. And some of the food banks also produce their own products to prevent ugly food being wasted. And in terms of food waste handling, the most common methodology that we usually use in Indonesia is composting and black soldier flies. And usually food waste itself is treated along with other organic waste such as yard waste, etc. And the treatment is, we usually have like a communal facilities. We call it a TPS 3R, or composting facilities, or private sector's material recovery facilities. In this picture, I saw you the one that is located in Waste for Change MRF. I think that's all from me. Thank you so much. Hopefully, you can have some beneficial information for my presentation. I will give it back to you, Mbak Azizah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anisa, for your presentation. Indeed, food loss and waste have strong impacts on Indonesia's environment, economic, and nutritional loss. It is also interesting how behavioral change is needed, or in fact, one of the most important strategies to tackle food loss and waste in Indonesia. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Ying, who will share her experience from the People's Republic of China on sustainable value chain of agricultural products. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
No, not yet.
Seems I have some technical issue. Is it okay if you help share the screen for me? Yeah, thank you.
I think we can also try to share the presentation from SEI side.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, could you show the presentation, please?
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zhou, and I'm from the Foreign Environmental Cooperation Center of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China. I would like to thank SEI for inviting me to attend this discussion. It's really a pleasure to discuss the transforming of food system through circular practices. And I will talk about how we can promote the sustainable agricultural food supply chain from agri-food products to the food waste management, and based on the findings of some of our previous studies. Next page, thank you. So first, I would like to give you a bit of background information about sustainable agricultural supply chain management. As many of you know, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns is the key to SDG 12, the responsible consumption and production, which requires the sufficient use of various natural resources. Agriculture and related production and consumption sectors are the most crucial in achieving a harmonious and sustainable relationship between people and nature. So agricultural activities has a significant role in climate change by changing land use and carbon capture through ecosystem. I would like to share our research on the palm oil supply chain and take it as an example to discuss how the agri-food supply chain can enhance sustainable management. Since palm oil is the most significant vegetable oil, it accounts for about 40% of global vegetable oil consumption. Its cultivation area and production volume have expanded very rapidly, which causes some environmental and social challenges. Next slide, please. So in 2020, the total import of palm oil was nearly 5,000 million tons, and export reached 5,100 million tons globally. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand are the world's top 3 palm oil producing countries. Indonesia is actually the largest palm oil producer, took up over 60% of global production. Millions of people in Indonesia depend on palm oil production for their livelihood. And Indonesia, India, China, and the EU are the top 4 countries in direct palm oil consumption, accounting for about 50% of global palm oil consumption. Next slide, please. So the G20 countries account for about 80% of global trade in agricultural goods and 60% of agricultural land. The 4 major palm oil consuming countries, including Indonesia, India, the EU, and China, are all G20 countries. In 2020, the EU and Indonesia consumed more than 50% of the palm oil for industrial use, mostly as biofuel, which while India and China use palm oil mainly for food. Next slide. The agro-food supply chain is facing several challenges worldwide. First of all, as briefly mentioned, agricultural activities are closely related to climate change, as it results in 38% of global methane emissions and 79% nitrogen oxide emissions, and unsustainable agricultural development accompanied by socio-economic challenges such as biodiversity destruction, land grabs, and social conflict. Secondly, agro-food waste or loss is very severely at the global level, accounting for FAO. Each year, about 1.3 billion tons of food produced is lost or wasted globally at every point in the value chain, from harvest to consumption. 14% of food valued at an estimated $400 billion is lost, and 17% more is wasted at the retail and consumer level. Such a global volume of waste has high cost. It is reported that the annual economic cost of food waste is about $1 trillion, a social cost of $900 billion, and an environmental cost of $700 billion. Next slide. Therefore, proper management of agro-food waste is also an important segment of the agro-food cycle management. Apart from preventing food loss, recycling and recovery practices are essential to maximizing the value of agri-food rather than ending in the disposal. The waste can be collected and converted into various products with values, which generally can be divided into 4 groups: agricultural production or biofertilizer, renewable energy generation, polymers or other artificially synthesized compounds, and the bioactive compounds produced from fermentation. Next slide. So taking palm oil as an example, the waste generated during the production procedure can be processed into various products. As shown in the plot, palm kernel can be used as a source of energy, an important source of raw material for biomass energy generation. Palm fiber is a natural component that can be found in palm fruit. Palm fiber can also be used as a source of raw material for biomass energy generation. The empty fruit bunch can be made into papers or be composted and then be used as organic fertilizer. Palm fatty acid distillate and palm oil meal effluent can also be processed and converted to products with economic value. Next slide. Another example is corn plastic. By converting corn into polylactic acid, the PLA, corn cob and corn straw through the complex chemical process into liquefied sugar, lactic acid, polylactic acid, and other industrial raw materials eventually can become biodegradable bags, agricultural fuel, rice seedling, cloth, and other terminal products. Such biodegradable plastic have many advantages over traditional plastics. It requires 65% less energy to produce than conventional petroleum-based plastic and emits 68% fewer greenhouse gas. Next slide. So by looking into current practical approaches and best practices, our study came up with a list of policy suggestions to the critical stakeholder for improving the sustainable management of the agri-food supply chain. First, the government could lead and guide sustainable production, trade, and consumption by improving the relevant policy and standards and strictly monitoring the implementation, guiding enterprises to apply nature-based solutions, encouraging social capital investment in the sustainable agri-food industry and waste management, strengthening capacity building for all sectors to enhance production efficiency and minimize the ecological footprint for the production and cultivation process, and shaping consumer preferences, and encourage for agriculture and food products produced by low emission methods. Financial institutions could support a sustainable supply chain to achieve a win-win situation for economic development and environmental protection by incorporating sustainable standards into loan agreements to restrain the companies from complying with sustainable operations, disclosing their supply chain information to accelerate the company's sustainable practices, and provide financial support for agri-food waste management programs. Next, please. Enterprises have the responsibility to practice the concept of sustainable production consciously. Enterprises could keep up with critical environmental issues related to business operations, follow the policies, and invest more in technical innovations in the cultivation and production of sustainable products, and make detailed ESG disclosure for the company's sustainable development and the industry. The upstream enterprises formulate sustainable production policies and form industry alliances to restrict unsustainable production practices, while downstream enterprises must develop corresponding sustainable food procurement policies. International organizations and research institutions could facilitate and promote community livelihood and scientific production by increasing smallholder livelihood diversity and community inclusiveness, raising public awareness and knowledge of sustainable agri-food and waste recycling, and focusing on technological innovation to improve the agri-food yield and maximize the resource efficiency. Next. So that's all of my presentation. Thank you once again. And it is a pleasure to discuss and explore how to promote a more efficient food supply chain and sustainable agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zhou. After listening from country G20 specific member countries, our next two panelists will be discussing on more regional and global levels. I would like to remind you to share any questions that you have in the chat box, including any comments that you have. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Anja from Eurocities to share some of her insight on innovative circular solutions to prevent food waste.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my presentation. It was really great to hear so much on what the work that is being done on the other side of the world. It's really fantastic. Sorry, my computer seems not to be willing. I hope you can see my presentation. Can you please confirm?
Not yet.
Yes. Now, yes, right?
No, not yet.
Sorry, too many settings in the computer. If you could please actually do it for me, then I would really appreciate. I have too many screens and my computer is not coping with it. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yes, as I said, thank you for the fantastic introduction. I would like to bring indeed a little bit the European perspective of what is happening here, what cities are doing, and the importance of integrated urban food policy. So a little bit beyond focusing only on food waste. And just a little bit in the next slide on the basis, where do we start to work? Some of you might be familiar with the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. It's really the idea that cities have a strong role to play in changing our food system. And it's not only about food production, but it's really about the circularity of the entire food system. And that is why it's necessary to act across the entire supply chain, especially when we talk about food losses and waste, and the role cities can play in changing food system through indeed try to change the consumption side of food, but also the production side, because through their procurement power, cities can also change what is produced and what is bought. So why it is important, as you might know, 80% of Europeans already live in cities, and throughout the world, it is expected that by 2050, 80% of the entire global population will live in cities. So what do we want to achieve? On one hand, we want food that is grown in a regenerative way and where possible also locally. So try to really redimension the food trade and focus rather on buying local or buying regional and national levels. On the other hand, of course, the importance of making the most of food, reducing food waste, and focusing on recovery of food where possible. And as a final element, a very important one, particularly for Europe and the rising issues of child obesity or obesity in general, it's about design and marketing healthier food. So these are the three important actions that cities can take. So in the next slide, a little bit about some of the entry points, because every time I talk about food and the role of cities, the most immediate reaction is food waste. However, here it's really about showing that urban food policy, when they are really ambitious, and when they are systemic, they can really look at a variety of issues, for example, food security and food access. And this is particularly important nowadays because in Europe, we are seeing an increase in the amount of food aid needs. So cities really had to step up, particularly after the COVID-19 crisis. The number of people that is asking for food aid is increasing. And more recently, after the Ukraine war and the number of refugees that we are seeing in Europe, it is even more important that we understand how we can recover food in order to use it more for food aid solution. So and above all, it's also a cut in emissions. So this is really why it is important an integrated food policy, not only tackling food waste or food losses, but really looking at the public health, the food safety, and the local economy in a systemic way. In the next slide, just a little bit, you might have seen this important images has been used quite a lot. Is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it's just to showcase indeed that the current amount of valuable nutrients that are going back from cities to the farm or to the production side is currently extremely low. And this is why when I'm going to talk later about the farm to fork, this is a European Union communication that will soon become also legislation. It is actually not extremely correct, because what we are looking at instead is not a farm to fork policy, but a farm to farm policy. So how do we make sure that, especially if we can support regional food system, valuable nutrients are brought back to the production side of food? So let's move to actions. What are cities doing nowadays in the next slide, and how can we feed the different cycles? So these are just, again, a little bit, again, from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. If you don't know this source, I will really invite you to look into it. It's not only about acting on food losses and waste, but really acting about the entire circularity of the food system. And here are just some of the impressive numbers in terms of savings in farmers' profitability, but of course, reduction in greenhouse gas emission and reduction in biodiversity loss. That is, I think, fundamental nowadays. And the most important is about prevention, redistribution, and I will talk a bit about the role, of course, of food banks, but also beyond, also what food banks can achieve, and also where, for all the food that is not possible to be recovered, how do we make either new materials, like we heard just before, or how we can input to agriculture. So in the next slide, we have mapped what European cities are currently doing to tackle food waste and food recovery. Most of the actions are in relation to awareness, because as you might know, I think it's similar across Europe, but across the world, as we have seen also from the presentation from colleagues from Indonesia. But in Europe, also, most of the food is wasted at the household level, so almost 50%, which means it's also very difficult to be recovered, because then what you can do with it, you cannot redistribute it. You can only use it for methane or for composting. In addition to be a burden for the waste management, it's actually very costly to manage bio-waste. So what are we cities mainly doing is we're working, of course, on awareness raising, but above all, food donation. It's really important, it's becoming more and more important nowadays. And I wanted to present the work of Glasgow. This is a city in Scotland, recently famous for hosting the COP. And what they really, the approach they have to it is really interesting, because they've created food pantries, which is basically small supermarket where you can find recovered food for people that are in need and for people that are not able to purchase food at supermarket prices. So this is especially a way that takes into consideration really the possibility for people to go and buy without being labeled as poor, because this is just a place like anybody else. And then we have, for example, initiative like in Turin, in Europe, we have quite a lot of food markets in cities, and this is actually where you have quite a lot of food waste. And Turin was seeing a very kind of sad issues of people going at the end of the market and trying to pick food from the square, the food that will be discarded and just used as rubbish on the square. And instead, what they're doing, they pair up with organization for migrant integration, for local food aid shelters, with a waste management company, and they came up with basically a very simple solution that this food that will be discarded by the seller is instead donated at the end of the food market to those that come in need. So again, the idea that you don't have to go and collect it from the floor, but you can, in a more dignified approach, go and collect it. And these are incredibly simple solutions, but highly effective. Another one is, for example, providing restaurant with doggy bags so that people can just take home the food that they are not able to eat anymore in the dinner. So again, very simple solution, but with highly return of investment, considering the work it's mainly, the kind of investment that is done is not really high. And another very important action is procurement. Cities are responsible most of the time for all the public meals in public canteens. We think mainly of schools, but also hospitals, prison, and through their procurement, they are working also on reducing the food waste, particularly in schools. So this is another very important areas of action. In the next slide, just one of the most impressive work. It became really famous last year when Milan won the Earthshot Prize, is the local food waste hubs. So basically the city of Milan provided basically the place and the legislative framework for different type of organization to come together to recover the food in a safe way, respecting the value chains, respecting the chain of cold, so the food could be donated safely. And the numbers speak for themselves. Again, we have 44,000 euro of total commercial value of food that was saved. You have saving when it comes to waste management, which is estimated at 600,000 euro. And now the city of Milan is planning to reinvest in food aid solution for the most deprived, and then providing almost 14 million meals. This is something that actually this data are from 2018, and the data are incredible, became really more impressive after the COVID-19 and what Milan had to manage in terms of the COVID-19 crisis. Just a little bit now that I've talked about the actions, a little bit about the European Union very quickly. So the European Union, it's of course, you might be aware that the European countries are collaborating across thanks to the European Union, and food is becoming particularly relevant also there, food waste. In the next slide, you'll see something called the Farm to Fork, is this new initiative to, once again, not to tackle food waste just as a single item, but really look at the entire food chain and allow it to tackle it in a systemic way from production to consumption. And this is really important. And this is what I think it's really important that should happen, because until we keep on looking at food waste just as one item, it's not going to be the same as instead looking at it in a systemic, both at local, regional, or the European level. In the next slide, some of the initiatives that the European Union is planning to do on food waste. As I mentioned, 42% of food waste is produced at the household level. But what they want to do is really providing legally binding targets for food waste reduction by 2030. But the integration of food waste prevention across all of the European Union policies and also national level. In the European Union, we also have, of course, best buy products. So the dates are usually causing quite a lot of confusion among consumers and are one of the causes of food waste. And very important, which is something that maybe the G20 countries could look at, we have in the European Union, the EU platform on food losses and waste. So this is a platform where different type of actors can get together and really work together against for better promoting policies on food losses and waste. In the next slide, however, I will talk about some of the most innovative, I think, work that the European Union is looking at, and I think have really lot of potential to work on food waste. And they're not directly related to food waste, but what they're thinking of doing is support national food strategy. Currently in the European Union, countries mainly have a food agricultural strategy, agricultural policy, and this is not enough because again, it's looking at food system just from one side. So what we are thinking of, what the European Union is thinking of doing in the next year is having instead mandatory food strategy in all European Union countries. Some countries already have them, but this could become something that would become mandatory. What is also extremely important is the role of multi-level governance and dialogues, and the role, because certain policies to be really efficient cannot be done by just one level of government. It's not going to be only the cities or the region or the national level implementing a policy. You need really a coordinated approach. And this is why we need multi-level dialogues, really where all the different actors, all the different governance levels come together. Also, what is incredibly interesting is the capacity building across countries. So, for example, we have certain countries that have experimented policy that have become really successful. And this is the idea of sharing them across countries in order for them to help to learn from each other and to transfer similar policies. And this is also what we are doing in Food Trails project. We are supporting cities to learn and exchange with each other, so that policies like the one in Milan that has worked really well might be implemented in other cities in Europe or in the world. Another important area of work is research and innovation. Do not underestimate the need for more research and innovation, even when it comes to food waste, even for understanding the data. So there is a strong policy related on research innovation policy in the European Union, and this is providing quite a lot of funding for scaling up and testing of innovation, particularly the living labs of cities that I currently work on. And this is always in a quadruple approach to innovation. Why it is important, a quadruple approach? Because for any type of action, you need citizens, you need researchers, you need the businesses, and you have the local governments. So any kind of innovation needs to happen in a quadruple approach system. Finally, some of the food for thought in my next slide, some of the opportunities and challenges that maybe might be looked at in the discussion. The opportunities to work more in an integrated way, both on food policy and on circular economy policies and approaches. Once again, tackling only food waste or food losses will not achieve a systemic approach to food system change. The possibility for economic development, what we are noticing in the Food Trails Living Lab is really the role of SMEs and startups, because at the end they are the one also implementing and providing new ideas and way to for example, make food production, urban food production from what was considered food waste before. Here in Brussels, where I am, we have a fantastic place that is producing mushrooms out of the leftover from the beer production. And the mushroom is produced here in Brussels and is sold here in Brussels in all the supermarket. Yes, I'm coming to an end. The opportunities, as I mentioned, for multi-level governance collaboration, it's very important and can streamline a different way of working across cities, regions, and countries, not only for food. The challenge is it is really, really difficult to have, for cities in particular, to have data on the food flows. And this is particularly important, for example, when you're trying to plan food aid solution policy. It's also as a starting point, the understanding of all the key actors that have a role to play on food system and how to bring all these actors on board. And last but not least, the need for mobilizing or repurposing funding and finance. There is European countries already putting quite a lot on the mainly agricultural policy, but this policy will need to be repurposed in order to look at really a circular economy food system, and in addition also to attract new financing investment. My last slide is just another way to thank you. And if you want to get in contact, you have the way to reach out to me. And I'm also looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anja. Last but not least, I would like to invite Felicitas to share more information on food loss and waste prevention and utilization and the role of Max 20. Please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can see my screen now and my presentation. It will start immediately or not. Yes, can you see it?
Yeah, but it's not on the presentation mode. So if you could.
Yes, perhaps I have to. Well, it is on the presentation mode, but on the wrong screen. We'll start again. So, can you see it now?
Still not on the presentation mode. Maybe
Okay.
Kohei can help.
Yes, please share it. I will stop my sharing. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So it's, yes, we already heard a lot about food waste. So I will just give you some information about the collaboration initiative on food losses and waste. As this webinar targets G20 countries, I would briefly like to introduce some of our activities. Thank you very much. So we already heard that food loss and waste is a real challenge on a global scale, and due to the Agenda 2030, we already have a target which we should fulfill. The Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 calls to halve food waste and to reduce food loss until 2030. So only a few years left. And the G20 countries started in 2015 to collaborate on this topic within the meeting of agricultural chief scientists. In the year 2015, the Turkish colleagues hosted the G20 presidency, which moves every year to another country. And their idea was to initiate a collaboration initiative on food losses and waste, because this is not an issue which can be solved by one country alone, but you have to cooperate due to the international trade activities, and food system is not only focused on national area, but it's international. Germany took the initiative's lead and finances the coordinator, which is me, since then. And the aim of our initiative is to join forces and to achieve a noticeable reduction of food losses and waste on a global scale. Next slide, please. And our activities are twofold. So the one direction is to work directly with the meeting of agricultural chief scientists and the G20 presidency host country. And this is why food loss and waste issue is addressed in all G20 MEX communiques and minister declarations from 2015 onwards. In some years, for example, in 2020, also the water ministers were included in this agri and water minister declarations, because we think this is very important to have an interministerial cooperation, which is difficult because in each G20 country, the number of ministers and ministries and the main targets of the responsibilities of the ministries is different. So, but in 2020, we also included the water ministers in our declarations. In 2018, for example, we had a very fruitful cooperation with the G20 host Argentina. We, as a collaboration initiative, we supported the agri minister to submit a proposal towards the United Nations to establish an International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste. And perhaps you already know, since 2020, September 29th is now dedicated as the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste, and is celebrated in a lot of countries and a lot of cities each year to raise awareness within the society. On a political level, it is very important to have this political commitment towards specific topics. And so Turkey, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and also this year Indonesia put food loss and waste as one of the relevant topics on the official G20 presidency agenda. And this is, of course, a very important support for also practical implementations and to raise awareness and to raise the magnitude of discussions within this year of presidency. So we are very happy that Indonesia also decided to have food loss and waste as one of the major topics. And our initiative conducts and organizes annual regional food loss and waste workshops, which is fortunately officially supported by most of the MEX G20 secretariats. So for example, this year we will have a regional food loss and waste workshop in Indonesia by the beginning of October. And with our workshops, we do not only target the G20 country, the corresponding G20 country, but also the neighboring countries. And the aim is to facilitate the regional networks and to learn from each other and to address specific topics which are relevant for the corresponding region. So on this political level and political commitments, there's a further need to act in a harmonized way and also to discuss the topic in a more interministerial cooperation. And this would be our wish for the next years. Next slide, please. But we do not only collaborate on a political level, but also on a practical level and with colleagues from research. And this not only for the G20 countries, but for all countries which are interested. So we are open for cooperation with different stakeholders from different countries. It was already mentioned in the introduction round that we also host the first global food loss and waste expert database. So it's web-based and you are very welcome to register if you are a food loss and waste expert for a specific part of the food supply chain, for a specific product. So it's up to you. And our idea was that it's easy for interested people to find experts for specific questions and that you can learn from each other and you can share your experiences. The experts are not only registered as a person, but also together with their projects. So you are very welcome to have a look at our database and explore the information there. I already mentioned the regional food loss and waste workshops. This is a series taking place since 2017. And one of the results of this regional workshop from Buenos Aires was a joint commitment of different stakeholders collaborating in Latin America and the Caribbean very closely with different projects targeting businesses, social organizations as food banks, for example, but also to raise awareness within the societies of the different countries. And so one of the collaborating partners, for example, is the World Bank and also the Global Food Banking Network and the Food and Agriculture Organization, Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's a very important initiative which was released after the workshop. You are also very welcome to have a look at our activity reports. You can see it on the on our website. I already posted the link for this website. And we, as an initiative, also support publications so that colleagues from other countries which have research results are able to share it with the international community. For some researchers, this is very easy, but for other researchers which are not so experienced with the publications, we support them to find a journal and to be published. We also host special issues, or organize conference sessions, and we are able also to provide capacity building for colleagues from different countries to come to Germany and to see how we deal with food loss and waste in the European Union and in Germany, and to share our experiences and knowledge. And also our initiative supports the work of international bodies, for example, with the Food and Agriculture Organization, the UNECE, the Economic Commission for Europe, and the UN Environmental Programme. We already heard about the European Platform of Food Loss and Waste, and a new initiative was started also within the International Standardization Organization towards food loss and waste standardization processes. So our aim is to facilitate a comprehensive approach to improve not only the food loss and waste issue, but to improve the whole food systems. And yes, we're very happy to share our knowledge and experiences also with you. And I'm looking forward to the next discussion section. So next slide, please. And thank you very much. And yes, I'm looking forward to discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all panelists for their very informative presentations. Sorry. Thank you to all panelists for their very informative and interesting presentations. I believe there are still many aspects that you have not covered, and we hope to address some of them in the discussion session soon. For all the participants, please do share your questions with us in the chat box. We have our first question ready. It's from Jennifer McCullen from SRI. I think this will go to Felicitas and Ying. First question is, how do the governments respond to these policy suggestions? Second, are the practical links between policy and actual practices followed through in reality? What are the setbacks with holding this? I think wants to start first. Maybe Ying. Felicitas, do you want to answer first? Do you want to go?
Yes, sorry, I had problems to unmute myself. I think that the question was about the current response of Indonesian national government on this food loss and waste issue. So I think Indonesia had a lot of interesting ideas. So they already organized a gap analysis workshop, a webinar on an international basis, which was dealing with, especially with data gaps. So which knowledge is missing to address food loss and waste in a proper way. We already heard that it's not so easy to measure food loss and waste in the different levels of the food supply chain, and that there are a lot of methodologies are available, but all have their pros and cons. And so it's important in order to use also the financial resources available to tackle food loss and waste and to collect food loss and waste data, to share knowledge on the methodologies before you implement the methodologies in practice, and try to find the hotspots in your food system, for example, to achieve reduction results within only some years, and not that you have to wait for several years to see the real production potential. So we already heard about different examples from different cities, for example, with the previous presentation from Eurocities. I think this was very important, that we need a collaboration of the different stakeholders. And I think the governments are called to facilitate this collaboration within their countries. And here I see room for improvement within the G20 countries.
Okay, thank you. Since we were discussing about Indonesia as well, maybe Ms. Anissa wants to add something on the response of Indonesian national government on food and lost waste issue. Hello? Can you guys hear me well? Right. Yeah. Maybe I can also open this to the floor if anyone wants to add anything on the current response of Indonesian national government on food loss and waste issue.
Okay, sorry, Mbak Azizah. I think I was not hearing you well. What was the question again?
Sure. How's the current response of Indonesian national government on this food loss and waste issue? Has this issue been deemed as a focus or priority, and has it been adopted into a national policy goals?
Yeah, as far as I know, currently it was leading by Bappenas, or Ministry of National Development Planning, since they are the one who launched the baseline study. But during the creation of the study, and I think afterwards as well, we involved lots of other ministries, such as Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Ministry of and the other ministries that are related, and I think we don't, even though currently there is no specific regulation yet regarding food loss and waste, and it is still under waste management regulation in general, but I think there are some efforts moving towards there. And I think one of it is what already mentioned by Dr. Felicitas, that food loss and waste is also considered as one of the topics discussed in G20. And yeah, I think there are lots that needs to be done in terms of policies and activities to support this food loss and waste. But the House of Representatives and the Ministry of National Development Planning, they have been conducting some activities and designing some policies to support the food loss and waste, and the food bank as well. And I believe there will be, more effort towards this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, there's a question from Nadia. I believe this, I think this will go to Ms. Anja and maybe Kuntum, if you want to add. I believe we're all, as consumers, play a big role in alleviating this issue, such as taking mindful consideration of the food that we purchase and consume. When generating food waste is inevitable, what do you suggest for people as consumers do to minimize the impacts?
Yeah, so very quickly, there are two types of waste. The one that you have because you have overpurchased, and indeed the one that is inevitable, like simply the peels of the potatoes that you cannot really find a way to eat. So what cities are currently working on is twofold. On one hand, training. This is something that has been proved to work particularly well also in public canteens, training for the cook, for the chef, on how to cook using all the single parts of the vegetables, and which looks like something small, but indeed they have really measured the number of kilograms of food that they've managed to save in that case. And when indeed it is not possible because it's food that is waste that is unavoidable, the solution is indeed separate waste collection in order then to use it as methane or as ideally we bringing it back to the countryside for food agriculture. So these are kind of the two solutions. But of course, the real circularity of it and bringing it back to the countryside would require a systemic approach to the entire food system that is not always easy to look at, particularly because of the differences between the local government and the regional government, and who will take the responsibility, how can you collaborate or not collaborate, the different political vision, for example. So that's why you really need this different level of governments to work together. I hope this satisfies the questions in terms of consumers' work.
I can also add a bit. I think also from the other panel's presentation, we also mentioned about the behavioral change. And this is something that we need to highlight. So Nadia already mentioned on taking mindful consideration when you purchase and consume. So these could include, when you buy your groceries, you already know what you're going, like when and like what kind of food that you're going to take the whole week. Because even myself, sometimes whenever I go to market and you see like, oh, this looks like, this is in season, but then it's end up in your fridge and then you kind of forget it. So I think just from a very personal level, having a meal prep, I think that would be also helpful to understand that what you're going to have the whole week. And also in some of this is also what we can support of having a more holistic approach. And also when you, on the personal level, we need to have the supporting system as well. So with Milan, we saw that the urban policy, ASEAN Asia is actually based in university called Chulalongkorn in Bangkok. And in the cafeteria, there's an option of the portion that we want to take. And I think that also happens. So, because usually when we order in a restaurant or we take out, all of us have the same portion when then, it end up to waste. And then they also have a very big bucket that like all the food waste goes there. So it's kind of like a shocking therapy to see how many of food by the end of the day during lunchtime that goes to waste. And there's also, usually there's an app, and I think Lisa mentioned all of the different SMEs or startup app where they can also take the food waste that you have and then somehow make it a new product or share it with other people, and identifying all of these alternatives around you, that would be great as well to minimize the food waste.
Thank you so much. Felicitas and Zhou, do you have anything to add to that? All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, I totally agree what Kuntum said, and that the governments also should be aware to provide the framework conditions to change the behavior. So without the framework conditions, the people are not able to change the behavior. For example, I have a university class in Iceland, and we discussed the different food loss and waste prevention measures. For example, to offer fruits and vegetables unpacked, so that you only can take the amount you need. But in Iceland, you will find all the fruit and vegetables be packed in the supermarket. So it's very difficult to buy the amount you actually need as a single person household or as a student household. And so the framework conditions are very important, that prevention measures can be implemented in practice by all the different actors along the food supply chain, not only the consumers, but also the supermarkets, the traders at the street market. So it's very important to think about the framework conditions as well. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. A huge thank you to all speakers, panelists, moderators, and participants. On behalf of CIPS and SEI, I'd like to sincerely thank all of our speakers and participants for today's very engaging and thought-provoking discussion. There are many more interesting points, but all these insights from panelists or participants, we will compile them and produce a brief note based on our discussion today. Thank you for all the valuable insights, and we look forward to sharing the insight from this webinar in the upcoming weeks. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.